Hi, this is Michael Uslan. You're listening to Batman on Film.
Hello and welcome to the Batman on Film satellite show. This show is a proud member of the Batman Podcast Network, hosted by Batman on Film. Check out all of the shows over at BOF proper under the podcast tab, and follow our Twitter at BatPod Network, as well as BOF's Instagram at Batman on Film. And if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, please take the time to rate and review the show. It would really help us out and spread the word. On today's show, we are wrapping up our discussion about the Obi-Wan Kenobi limited series airing on Disney+. I am your host, Ryan Hoss, and I have yet again used the Force to bring along Chris Clow onto the Batman on Film satellite show. How are you doing, Chris Clow?
I'm doing well, my friend. Thank you for the invitation once again. Lots of interesting stuff to talk about here.
Yeah, it's interesting to be here at the end of Obi-Wan Kenobi. You know, we did our first episode right at the midway point, and we had a lot of thoughts, and and I had some fears, like how is this gonna? I mean, we know it's that crazy thing with Star Wars, right? Now that we have all this content, you know where a lot of the pieces end up, but seeing how they get there is up to the show to do. So hopefully, I didn't really have anything built in my head, but I was hoping they would come out with something that was worthy of making the show. And spoilers, I think they did. So if you disagree, you might be shutting the show off now, but I digress. So yeah, I'm not sure what the best way to handle the whole thing is. I haven't really been keeping up too much with, online discourse, because thankfully I was in the middle of a, bifurcated vacation when this show came out. I did, I went to Indianapolis with my family, and then before we came back to North Carolina, we had like one day where, we were resetting and packing for the next day, and we got up, and before we left from Tennessee to go back to North Carolina, I told my dad, I'm like, okay, I know we have a car trip, but we have to watch Obi-Wan right now, because I'm going to get spoiled and the internet's going to tell me what I'm supposed to think about it. And, I can't do that. Plus he has a really awesome theater room. So you can shut the doors and have surround sound, and it's, I wasn't going to pass that up. So because I knew there was going to be, I knew it was going to be a awesome, lightsaber fight at least, or something. Actually, I wasn't convinced that there would be a lightsaber fight at the end, but I'm glad I was proven wrong.
Oh, so actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because before we actually talk about the other episodes, I have to ask, did you employ HuSync for this last episode when you got home?
When I got home, I absolutely did. I watched that again today, that final episode. That's awesome. Love the HuSync.
The lightsaber. So for those who aren't aware, Hue Lights, like a set of smart lights manufactured by Philips, and they have a HDMI sync box that you can plug an external device into. And if you have like a Hue light strip on the back of your TV and maybe other lights, it can coordinate the lights that flash around your TV based on what's on the screen
in real time.
Real time, and it's extraordinarily responsive to lightsabers. So that Star Wars was the first thing I tested mine out on when I first got it, and
it's incredible. They don't sponsor the show, but they should, because it's really amazing. I think at some point I might have posted. I don't know if I posted video of it, but I posted at least some screenshots of like Zack Snyder's Justice League with the Hue lights behind it on one of the BOF, I think on BOF's Instagram. and people were like responding like, this isn't Bill would never post
Zack Snyder's
Justice League and blah blah. I'm like, yeah, well, it's me.
You should have done Rainbow Road, man. That gives them a little bit of a workout, I can tell you.
That's true. Oh my gosh. Yeah, and I've got it set up up to like, the app has it gives you 3 different modes basically, like, but
how responsive you want them to be, right?
How responsive, based on a game, based on a movie or whatever. And I definitely upped the intensity for this, so the lightsabers you would get more lights, more flashing.
Yeah, totally.
And and it's one of those things where it sounds gimmicky, but if you get the settings right, it really is immersive.
It's cool.
It's cool. I vouch for it. Whenever it's not on, I don't like it. But
one of the reasons I wanted to get it is because my wife is way too prone to looking at her phone when we watch stuff. I feel like just that slight little push in immersion might convince her to put it down at times. But only about 50% successful, but it's 50% more than I had before. So
yeah,
there's that.
Yeah, it makes movies feel more special. Like when I have it off when it's just during the day and like whatever's on.
Yeah.
But then when it's like game time or like movie time, it does kind of turn your living area. And that's for me, it's like, it's not like I have a dedicated theater room, you know, right. But like once the lights go off and this thing, the hue lights go on, it makes it feel, more special. So yeah, it's some investment,
it is.
Some monetary investment to do it. But, once you get the box, see, I started with just the 2 lights on the bottom, and then I added the strip, and then I got the HDMI sync, and I did it piecemeal, and then I'm glad I did because it's great.
Yeah, it's awesome.
So it's kind of like the last time we talked about episodes 1 through 3. It was like, okay, yeah, Obi-Wan. Let's just talk about the lightsaber fight. But I feel like this is kind of the same deal here at the end, but I want to rush to it, but I want to take our time a little bit. So maybe we should just go episode by episode, and start at episode 4.
Yeah.
And this, I think, is the shortest episode of the 6. I think it's like 38 minutes, 30 something minutes. Mm-hmm. But and that's one of the things that kind of, it is kind of that middle sequence in a movie kind of deal. And they were able to use their, the format to its advantage here. It's very reminiscent of the Death Star infiltration type stuff from like episode 4. And I don't know if it's a coincidence that this is part 4 of this show. I'm sure that's not lost on some people, but yeah, you kind of start to see Obi-Wan start to use the Force more, and Tala gets a lot, it's a good kind of break in between, because you get some good characterization for a lot of these people, and it sets up the Vader and Reva angle for what's to come in episodes 5 and 6.
Yeah, it does. And honestly, too, though, I think that one of the biggest pieces of value that this one had was just giving Obi-Wan his groove back, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we had seen over the first 3 episodes that he was kind of in a diminished capacity, and that it just seemed like, kind of like we would see with Luke later, the longer he went without immersing himself in the Force, the less he was accustomed to even the way that he used to be. But it was really cool to see this episode, not just because it really helped to give Obi-Wan his confidence back, and to understand really the scale of the threat that is presented to the Jedi by the Inquisitorius.
Mm-hmm.
But man, Fortress Inquisitorius, I didn't expect to see that, honestly. I had an idea that he was going to break into some base, but I didn't think it was going to be that one. And it was cool to go back there, because for anyone that's played Jedi Fallen Order, Fortress Inquisitorius is a pretty major location at the end of that game, which is like a couple of years, I think, before the events in Obi-Wan Kenobi take place. So they got to refortify that place. I mean, some kind of similar stuff happened at the end of that game, and with Obi-Wan's imposition into it. But it was, I mean, that's just the strength of continuity. That's one of the things that I tend to prefer about shared universe fiction in general. But, the preserved Jedi was shocking to me. And also, too, this one, it really seemed like it gave Leia an even greater degree of understanding about the kind of world that she finds herself in now. So, yeah, it was shorter, and I don't think that this is necessarily my favorite episode of the series, but it was very solid. And I know that some people have kind of complained about some of the goofier components of it, like Obi-Wan's giant coat.
Yeah, but that is so Star Wars, though. It really
I liked that.
Yeah, I didn't mind.
I thought it was fun.
Yeah, it's like, it reminded me of scenes in like Solo, even. Like,
yeah, right.
Yeah, and it's not implausible, in my opinion. Just the way that, like, there's so much going on. Everybody is kind of like, yeah, they're like, Imperial guards or whatever, but they're all kind of like on edge too. They're all kind of minding their own, doing what they're assigned to do. I can totally see that.
Well, and let's not pretend that the rank and file of the Empire are a model of competence either.
Exactly.
Even if you've only seen the original trilogy, do you really think that the
or especially if you've seen the original trilogy,
right? Yeah, I mean, do you really think that those Imperial officers or the Stormtrooper Corps are really batting 1,000 every time? I mean, it's probably half the reason the Empire would fall anyway. So, but I understand why people take it as seriously as they do. But at the end of the day, I'm far more interested in what the narrative is trying to say about the focus characters. The stuff on the outside is exactly that. It's on the outside. And what we see here from Ben specifically is a rediscovery and rededication to the principles that made him such a capable Jedi Master. And that was great.
Yeah, is this the episode where, he has to, where Obi-Wan has to keep the glass from shattering before the water comes in?
Yeah,
that was impressive. That was a really cool moment of and really that kind of that's like the light version of what happens in the final episode with the rocks. Right. I thought, there's some good poetry, there's some good poetry in there. And again, what we see with Leia, you see that interrogation type stuff that reminded me of scenes with Rey, in the sequel trilogy too.
Yeah, I think that there is some understandable symmetry there, but really I think one of the other things that this might kind of retcon into what we see from Leia later in her life is just some first-hand experience with how vicious the Empire is. Granted, she was probably always kind of predisposed to being against the Empire, considering who her father is, but it's different when you experience it yourself. Like, at 19, she already seems to be such an incredibly capable, not only a rebel leader, but also like a diplomat. And that's something that can really only come from experience. And as I said in the last episode too, part of that is alluded to in her appearance in Rebels. But everything that we're seeing from her here feels like it could contribute to the person that she becomes later. And that's absolutely true of her experiences by the time we get to the last episode.
Yes, and I think that's kind of I see that in, almost all of the characters in the show, the main characters in the show. They don't betray what, like the original trilogy has. It just strengthens it, but they've also managed to tell a new story with this. It's really kind of incredible how they haven't, like, even if things are retcons per se, it's not like overriding. It just gives, to take an Obi-Wanism, is just new points of view that just enhance what we already had.
Right, and there's wrinkles. I mean, we talked in the previous episode about the potential strength of a retcon. Like, a retcon is not bad in and of itself. Like, there are good and bad retcons. So, just the fact that this is retroactively affecting the continuity makes it a retcon, but does it add additional context? Does it add additional meat and potentially weight to some of the interactions that we see from Leia later? And I think it does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels like this is where Leia starts to feel like, okay, I'm going to be this person. I'm going to be this diplomat. I got to do it the smart way. If I'm going to be somebody that can overthrow the Empire, I can't just, do it. I've got to do it smartly. You have to do it smartly.
And it echoes the lack of fear that both of her parents had, during the prequels. Like, not only during the prequels, but during the Clone Wars. We saw several examples of the backbone of Padme, not only in the films, but most especially in the show. And, I don't want to get too far ahead here because I feel like this is a point that is best emphasized in the finale. Mm-hmm. But there are certainly echoes of both of her parents in the way that she's written that also feel in line with how she was performed in the original trilogy. So,
wow. Yeah. Yeah, we'll have to get back to that for sure because I totally agree with you. And those things have jumped out more upon repeat viewings of that final episode also.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's get to part 5. Yeah. So what's been one of the stronger, subplots of this show has been this underground Jedi network. This Jedi network / rebellion, basically. It's like the very infancy of it, I guess. In some ways. And this was an episode where I had no clue where it was going. I didn't know what was going to happen. I just figured, well, in the final part, you'll finally get your final showdown, but like, what's going to happen in this one? And this is where they kind of definitely move all the pieces and kind of end a bunch of stories so they can propel the whole thing back to the finale. But I liked seeing Obi-Wan's interaction with all of the characters in this episode. The whole scene between him and Reva where he has to, go and just talk to her to buy them time so Vader doesn't get there, and so they can buy time to leave. But that was the thing too, where I was trying to be one step ahead, but I wasn't sure if I was. Where Kenobi he basically figures out like, oh, Reva was a youngling, and she's actually kind of deep undercover, like she's just doing what she's doing so she can get to Vader too. And I was pretty surprised that that's the goal there, that's what they were doing with the character. But I'm glad that was the revelation, How did you feel about how that all played out?
Oh, I mean, it just instantly made me think of Luke's conversation with Obi-Wan and Yoda in Return of the Jedi. The fan base should have just listened to Obi-Wan when he said patience, right? Because the people who were jumping down that character's throat were doing so, like, barring the just repugnancy of certain people who were only jumping down her throat just to be trolls. People who expressed, I guess, bewilderment at this character's existence. This is the moment where she fully reveals exactly what she's up to. And I think it was kind of easy to see that this is what they were leading to, but maybe not quite in this form. Like the idea that she was there in the temple when Vader and the 501st were murdering her colleagues and her teachers and her friends. They kind of started to telegraph that right from the very beginning of the show. But I guess the cover aspect was something that I found just really cool. And it seemed like it made total sense, because not only was this promising Padawan twisted into the machinations of the dark side, but with that came an amplification of her own rage. I mean, it was probably the very thing that that attracted Vader to her in terms of becoming one of the Inquisitors. And and he alludes to the fact in this episode that he knew exactly who she was and what she probably wanted to do, but he still used her anyway.
Yeah.
And, it just shows how Vader is really dialed into the kinds of passions that can inflame people, something we know he's good at from the original trilogy. But in this case, too, it gives him a different kind of menace. And it also gives a lot of understandable sympathy for Reva herself. So I thought that whole turn gave a lot of service both to Reva and to Vader. Because Vader was, 2 steps ahead of her. And we always knew that Vader was a brilliant military commander, especially by the time he was in a leadership position with the Empire.
Yeah. And the way the whole... Yeah, that's kind of the position it puts Vader at the end. You kind of go through the episode thinking like, oh, wow, like Reva has been the person that's kicked this whole series into gear basically by Macus, by orchestrating the kidnap of Leia and trying to draw Obi-Wan out and everything. But by the time this episode's over, it definitely puts Vader ahead of everybody because he knew everything. He just knew where everything was going to go. And I guess to a bigger level, that's kind of like what Palpatine ends up doing. He sees things like a step above that even. Even to, comical degrees, I guess, once you get to things like, the Rise of Skywalker. But,
sure.
But it's interesting to see, to give those attributes to Vader in this episode. And boy, that lightsaber fight, that was like an extra bonus. It was just a cool, like, badass moment to see Vader and that was like a gasp, an audible gasp where he just marches through there and boom, he just stops that transport with one hand. You're like, oh crap, that's like a super, show of force
strength.
Power from Vader. And again, I went right to that moment in Rise of Skywalker when you got to see Rey do something really similar. But the way he just got it and ripped it down to the ground and ripped off the side paneling, that's like pure rage of like, this is how serious he is about getting Obi-Wan.
That's the chosen one,
Yeah.
He brings the full might of his power to bear. And honestly, that's one of the things that I like a lot about these modern explorations of Vader is that, let me put this in context. When I was a kid, like when the Phantom Menace first came out, I have a brother who's about 5 years older than me. And my brother's always been into like the hardcore badass kinds of villains. And I guess I'm a little bit more of a traditionalist. So when episode 1 came out...
what's his favorite Batman villain compared to what your favorite Batman villain is? Does that ring true for that example?
Well, he's a Joker guy.
Okay.
And honestly, like, with me, I don't know if it's... See, this is a whole other podcast. This is a complex question that I was not expecting. I might lean more towards Harvey Dent, maybe?
Ooh.
But, like, so his fascination with the Joker probably primarily comes from Nicholson, if I were to guess.
Oh, okay.
But when it comes to Star Wars, he was always, like, making fun of me because he was saying, Darth Maul could totally take Darth Vader. And, Darth Maul's got the horns and he's got the jumping around
lightsabers
and the double-bladed lightsaber and all that stuff.
Yeah.
No, he couldn't. Darth Vader is the strongest. And so now I honestly feel vindicated. Like, going back to those days
sure.
of, 23 years ago when 6th grade Chris was trying to defend Darth Vader against Darth Maul against his 11th grade brother. I feel more vindicated. But it's honestly just cool because since there has been so much additional material since the original trilogy, there is a little bit of a creative necessity to refortify the legendary aspects of some of those characters, and that's certainly true in terms of the power level of Vader, because you had an entire trilogy about the rise of Anakin Skywalker and the rise of Darth Vader that put him over as a uniquely powerful figure in the history of Force sensitivity. So, and then you also had like the amplified action that came with the prequels, and you had shows like the Clone Wars, and Vader, as great a character as he is, when it comes to like the visuals of the original trilogy, they could leave something to be desired. But now you have this modern iteration of the franchise, and the incredible scene at the end of Rogue One.
It's that whole thing. It's like, what is that? How do you strike that balance between like, this is amazing and badass, but it's not. It doesn't discount what happened in the original trilogy.
No,
and it's like and as long as what they're showing could lead you to believe that he plausibly, he could have done that in the original trilogy too. Like, that's fine.
Well, everything in that scene at the end of Rogue One, we had seen him do in one respect or another in the original trilogy. Like all of the powers that he displayed in that scene, absorbing blaster bolts and gripping people and throwing them around, just like blocking every single shot that comes at him. But it was all just amplified and maximized, particularly being in such a tight space. But you also have the second season of Rebels, where Vader is just an onslaught through the entire thing. And no one stands a chance against him. The Inquisitors themselves are nothing compared to the power of Vader. And then you have this show where he's just able to stop a transport and rip off half of it without even really thinking about it. And it also, too, like, it kind of reinforces how powerful Obi-Wan is and how powerful Luke grows. When you see, like, no one... And, like, I go back to Fallen Order because I just love that game a lot. I thought it was spectacular. And at the very end of Fallen Order, spoiler alert, you're running from Vader because you can't fight him. Like, you are just powerless to do anything against this unstoppable force. So you have all of that stuff combined into these moments, and it really just emphasizes how strong the original trilogy characters are in comparison with all of these other beings who try to go up against Vader, and how strong Obi-Wan is, and why he's the one who's single-handedly suited to try and take him down. But really, to me, the brilliant stroke of Part 5 was the framing device. Because starting in this simpler, lighter time where Obi-Wan and Anakin are practicing against each other.
Let's talk about that.
And over the course of the entire episode, framing that fight as one of the key components that informs the other person about the tactics and philosophies that they will present in a conflict was such a brilliant stroke. Like, not only was it just cool to see, like, Attack of the Clones era Obi-Wan and Anakin again in a lightsaber duel, but you juxtapose everything that they learn about each other in those moments with what you see over the course of this episode. Brilliantly written and excellently performed, in my estimation.
Yeah, when they announced that Hayden Christensen was coming back for this, the question of, well, they've got to, if they're bringing him back, they've got to be using him in some regard, and they've got to have a flashback scenes or something, right? So this is not what I was expecting, and I'm so glad I wasn't expecting what they did, because what they did was, like you said, it's a very specific scene that's broken up, a moment from their earlier lives, but it's all like character stuff. It's not like this, lore gap filler or whatever, but it's very tied to the characters and tied to who they are, and just the way that they framed it. Yeah, like sometimes it makes you think like, oh, this is Obi-Wan remembering this. Oh, this is Vader remembering this same thing of and just it really was cool to see, like, oh, this is what, to see Obi-Wan thinking back to that and be like, oh no, this is what he'll do, this is how he'll react. And emotionally, it was every bit as, maybe even, it just felt so sad, seeing, because when you watch the prequel trilogy, Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, it's one of those things that's, the inevitability of knowing Anakin is going to, fall and become Vader. And then he, of course, does at the end. But in this show, it's you already know where everything ends up, but it's still very jarring, and to see that juxtaposition between the two characters then and the two characters now, to see that jump, to see where they become, and all that history that you've experienced in, the original trilogy with Vader, and the prequel trilogy with, these specific actors playing Obi-Wan and Anakin then and now. It's pretty potent.
Yeah. Well, and one of the other things that I appreciate too is that if you only watch the movies, then it might be a little bit hard to reconcile the personality of Anakin Skywalker with the personality of Darth Vader. It's really the expanded material in things like the Clone Wars and in Rebels and in several of the novels, certainly, where the writers emphasize that, no, it's the same guy. It's just certain aspects of his personality are amplified significantly or suppressed significantly when he makes his turn to the dark side. I think that this episode's framing was particularly brilliant by helping to illustrate for the audience that a lot of these inclinations that Vader displays were really always there.
Yeah.
He had a more sufficient support system, certainly, but he also had a moderating influence of the light side of the Force that is absent by the time he becomes Darth Vader.
Yeah,
so,
it is like a Harvey Dent that has the support of Batman and Gordon before he becomes a villain in a lot of ways.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, it's certainly part of it. And, it's worth remembering just how manipulated Anakin is by Darth Sidious. That's one of the... Darth Sidious is a key architect in the construction of Darth Vader. And so seeing that pre-Sidious influence in the framing device, but also just hints of what Vader would fully devote himself to, you cannot defeat your enemies with mercy. Like, it's a little bit of a troubling thought coming out of the mouth of a Jedi, but you certainly see that is a maxim that Vader operates by later in his life. And
and something that Palpatine exploits for sure.
Yeah, and also too when Vader doesn't have anything to hope for, like in the period before he knows that he has children who are alive, all he devotes himself to is the will of the Sith and the will of his master. And he uses that brilliance in service to the dark side. And so it was just really cool to see that, he's always really had these kinds of notions and inclinations, and Obi-Wan has always had notions and inclinations toward mercy, which might not push him as far in a battlefield as Anakin, certainly, but they both exploit each other's potential weaknesses. And we see that more fully realized in that practice duel. I thought that it was just a brilliant way to characterize the conflict between them.
Yeah. And I had almost kind of given up thinking like, oh, well, maybe we won't get a flashback scene. And then they do it in part 5. And I was like, okay, damn it. And then it was, and the way, like you said, the way they used it was better than what I could have come up with. I mean, it really highlighted the struggle between the two characters. And gosh, in part 6, I love how that turns out. He's just like, what's the character's name? The character that, like, the resistance type leader guy.
The guy who's played by Ice-T's son, or Ice Cube's son, I mean.
Oh yeah, where he's just like, it's not about us, it's about you and him. Like, and you see that in part 5 for sure.
Yeah, Colin Roken.
Roken, yeah, okay, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that I liked how a lot of those side characters also just had to bring it themselves too.
Yeah,
like obviously Tala was a great character, and I thought it was really touching to see the sacrifice that she made.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Roken was awesome, and also too the two pilots. Well, actually, only one of them survived the trip outside of the base. But everybody coming together in this really kind of motley fashion, like that is the Rebel Alliance. Like, even if it doesn't have a name yet, or if it's not necessarily a part of the more militant rebels that we see later on, it's cool to see, that these are people who get hope where they can, when they can, and devote themselves to a certain goal. Like, that's the thing that ultimately does help to bring the Empire down.
Mm-hmm.
And, cool. Very cool.
So yeah. I was wondering what they would do with Tala after a few episodes of kind of building her up, and me thinking like maybe they're going to have her be like a character that you see lead this whole group, in the future and everything. But it was pretty, like, it was nice to see that they gave her a full character arc, and it definitely felt like it affected some of the decisions that Obi-Wan made later, where he just felt like, I have to make sure the future can survive, and the best thing that he can do is confront Vader and get this part of the Empire, done and over with.
Yeah.
So, like, that's kind of what part 6 ends up being, because the ship that Vader brought down, wasn't the one that had all the people in it. So they were able to escape, and Reva found the little transmitter that had Bail Organa's info about Luke. So I was like, oh man. And then the teaser image, like, on Disney Plus is, Vader and Obi-Wan on a desert planet, or it makes you think it's a desert planet. So I'm like, oh man, Are they going to fight on Tatooine? What's going to happen? But
no, it was really, I mean, I think that the writing staff deserves credit for knowing where these wrinkles are in the canon, in order to give greater service to the characters that we know. I mean, I know that you can't please everybody, and generally when it comes to Star Wars, the people who are not pleased tend to scream very, very loudly. Mm-hmm. But, this is really like the fandom's thing to ruin for themselves if they're really determined to, because this is proven to be a pretty worthwhile endeavor, considering that there was a fair amount of context that is still probably missing from certain aspects of the original trilogy in comparison to making everything connect together. you know?
Mhm.
And I think that as a piece of connective tissue, that's where this series, at least to me, has the most inherent value. But it's hard to go wrong with another solid performance from Ewan McGregor and company, certainly.
Yeah. And it's not just, like this part 6 is like a great full circle thing. And after watching it a couple times, I feel like they really did do as good as I think you probably could to enhance all the characters and fill the gaps, but not, overwrite what actually was laid out in the original Star Wars. And I love how, even though it's fun seeing like the inquisitorious question, like, well, Vader, why do we need to go after Obi-Wan? Shouldn't we stop this underground Jedi network? And just to see them be like, have to, like, listen to Vader. And he's like, clearly it's not the right tactical choice, but we're not going to tell Darth Vader to not, we're going to stand down and let him do this. But it is interesting. They always would cut to like the looks of people like, I don't know about this. Okay, right. Let him do what he wants to do. And I feel like that's like shadows of things that you end up seeing more and more and more of when you get to the original trilogy in the timeline, especially when he's just like force choking whoever, on the Death Star in episode 4. It seems like people have started to get to the end of their rope, of Vader getting to do whatever he wants, which I think is an interesting kind of progression of that.
Yeah. Well, and, I mentioned the Tarkin novel before on the last episode that we did, but really, like, who can stand in his way? Like, even if they really, really wanted to let Obi-Wan go, Vader's power is virtually absolute. Like, he's got the Emperor standing behind him and no one in between them. So the idea of just kind of reinforcing his place in the military hierarchy was something that I thought it made sense. So, but it also made sense, especially considering what we see at the end of episode 6, or part 6, I should say. The word episode is kind of like, there are connotations in a Star Wars show that come with saying the word episode.
Although there's TV episodes, but episodes, you can't just call a Star Wars thing an episode.
Exactly. But at the end of part 6, we see that Vader's obsession with Obi-Wan could have other consequences in terms of his relationship with his master. And I thought that was like a cool, like, having that scene where Vader chooses to let the other, insurgents go in favor of going after this one guy seemed like a good way to set up the necessity of having Vader give up the search. I know I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here, but
there is that is the second half. That is the flip side of that. Yeah, for sure.
Just mechanically, it made sense.
Yeah. And they had to do a lot of those mechanic types. Yeah, we'll get to that when we get to the end. Yeah. But yeah, so the whole episode is kind of framed for that. Like, you have the end, the denouement, the end. But the two main things here are, Obi-Wan versus Vader, and Reva versus Lars and Beru. And they were able to make that pretty captivating to me. Yeah. Again, mechanically, have that take place and it not suddenly be like, oh yeah, hey Luke, remember when a weird Sith person tried to kill you in the desert? And it's like, yeah, that happened, but they don't mention the word. They don't, it's just, if you're a canon stickler and you're looking for the holes, it'd be like, okay, it fits. But if you don't care about that stuff, it doesn't. It's not super obvious.
Well, I watched it pretty closely, and did he ever see her?
No.
So,
like, he's escaping just as soon as she gets in, and then he's like unconscious. It's late, dark.
Yeah, but
she carries him back.
It's just like he doesn't really know who's after him because
Exactly.
Owen tells him something entirely different in an effort to protect him, of course.
Right.
But he has a perspective about where the danger is coming from and doesn't ever really see what it is. So is there any violation here? I mean, I know that I know that can be interpreted as maybe cheap or tenuous, but I mean, I feel like it works, you know?
It works, and it's more, I feel like it's more than tenuous. I think it's fine.
Yeah.
Absolutely fine.
I don't understand the need to get all bent out of shape about that. Like, people seem to really be taking exception to that particular detail.
Yeah.
And that I don't really understand. I mean, this just served as a means to get Obi-Wan back to Tatooine. That's how I look at it. And if it can accomplish that without necessarily breaking any rules, even if it's technical, then it does its job. So I don't think there's anything to get bent out of shape about. It's not like the show is about Luke, and you don't really know all that much about what Luke himself takes from this experience later in life. Maybe we'll learn. You know, there's certainly the possibility for us to discover how Luke views that moment. You know, if Luke ends up appearing in another episode of The Mandalorian, which I don't think is out of the question, or if he shows up in Ahsoka, presuming that the show takes place in sort of the same timeline as Mando.
Right.
You know, maybe we'll learn more about what Luke thinks when he looks back on this moment. But
that's another one of those things where I'm like, well, boy, they really pulled all the stops out to have him in that episode. They'll never do that again. And then they have like a whole dang episode where they bring him back. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, how are they doing this?
Yeah, I mean, you think that it's going to be a one-time thing, but then
they just
it doesn't turn out that way.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't really understand the necessity that a lot of people have to bash that moment in particular. Because it also, like, in addition to getting Ben back to Tatooine, it also is an important moment for Reva to learn, like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be like the guy I'm trying to kill, you know?
Yeah.
It's a very traditionally Star Wars dichotomy to be presented with between the light and dark sides, and she makes a choice. Like, it's her own agency that takes her away from a more destructive path. That's Star Wars.
That's Star Wars. That moment is in so much of Star Wars. Absolutely, it is.
Like, people, I wonder, like, the people who scream as loudly as they do online, like, do you realize
they probably hated The Last Jedi too?
You guys would be on the dark side. Like, you're giving into all of your passions. You're not patient at all with anything, and you feel like people should be harsher and more severe. It's like, you would not be a Jedi. Try to be a Jedi, please. Just try to be one. Everyone would benefit if you did. Embrace the light. Embrace the vision, please. Just unsolicited advice. Yeah.
Yeah, I had to. Yeah, I was a Slytherin on Pottermore until, and then I was like, damn it, and then I was like, okay, I'll take my time, I'll breathe, I'll have more patience and take the quiz again, and then I was a Gryffindor, and I was like, okay,
there you go.
Okay, see, that makes sense.
There you go.
So
it works.
There's a line. There's a fine line between the two, I think, but you know.
Well, and I mean, it reveals, like, your approach to something like that too reveals, like, your inclination towards patience or impulsiveness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this fandom seems to be taking that test all the time. There's a very clear line between those who are accepting of other people's perspectives and are just in it to have a fun time in a debate about a shared interest and a shared love. Mm-hmm. And then there's those who take the darker path.
Yes. Oh boy.
Materialized in our own world. Art imitating life.
Oh yes. And, you know, stories. That's what Star Wars has always been about. Like, in the, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly don't understand how people who have grown up with this series in all its iterations can look at the choice that Reva makes and scoff at it, you know? Unless you're just, like, totally determined not to like this character. if you're at least open to the possibility of what she represents, and honestly, too, her contribution to getting Obi-Wan back to a more recognizable posture, like, it's totally fair game, and it's absolutely in line with
because then, oh my gosh, it kind of reflects back on Obi-Wan, because like Obi-Wan's telling her like, you know, what are you going to be now? Like, you have to choose. You can make that choice. Like, Obi-Wan kind of does the same thing. Like, what's Obi-Wan going to do?
Yeah,
you know,
she helps him too.
Exactly, that's what I was trying to say.
She helps him to find himself again, not only through their conflict, but also through its resolution. Like, this is a story that started with two enemies facing off, and it really ends between Obi-Wan and Reva, and then it ends with both of them laying down their swords. And the Jedi way is a non-violent way. So it seemed pretty well in line to me. Yeah.
And speaking of the Jedi way, let's get into this fight. This lightsaber fight. I was thinking maybe this lightsaber fight is not going to happen. Maybe it's going to be like The Last Jedi, where Obi-Wan takes a very Zen Jedi approach to this thing, based off of some things that happened in the earlier episodes. I just thought, like, maybe he's, because he had some lines, right, about like, sometimes you don't have to fight with a lightsaber, or there's other ways to win, or something like that. Do you remember? Yeah. And I was like, oh, maybe that's a foreshadowing for the final episode, and they won't actually do a lightsaber fight. But then they did, and I was like, okay, good. Yeah, they kind of didn't beat around the bush at all. Like, Vader flies straight to that planet, and he's like, and the dialogue, this is one of those great things. I have to put this lightsaber fight, probably it's got to be like top 3 in the franchise for me.
Very good.
It's not just flashy lightsaber fight. It's like every word that comes out of either of those characters holds so much weight. Like all the weight that, unfortunately you don't really get in, A New Hope. This sets up does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it like makes episode 4 like that much stronger. It
makes me
honestly, want to,
I was thinking honestly more about Return of the Jedi because, well, and also full disclosure, Return of the Jedi is my personal favorite Star Wars film. The resolution of the redemptive journey of Anakin Skywalker is something that just deeply resonates with me, and it always has. So that has always been, and probably always will be, my favorite Star Wars movie.
That I don't think it's my favorite, but every time it's probably my most underrated. Every time I watch Return of the Jedi, I'm like, man, there is good stuff in this movie.
There is,
and it's usually comes down to that Vader stuff.
So there's a moment in Return of the Jedi. Not sure if you've seen it. There's a moment in Return of the Jedi where Luke and Vader are having a rather casual conversation. It's kind of a stark moment in terms of how normal it is. You know, it's because it's kind of unusual in that respect. But Luke is pleading with him. He says, "Come with me." And Vader has this moment of sort of reflective pensiveness that is kind of uncharacteristic of every other moment that we've seen from him so far, except for maybe at the end of The Empire Strikes Back. And he just says, "Obi-Wan once thought as you do." And that's always been a line that stuck with me because it's never had proper context, really. Like, we didn't see that in A New Hope, and we didn't even really see it in the prequels all that much. Obi-Wan was pretty well ready at the end of Revenge of the Sith to write him off.
Yeah.
But then this show comes along, and you've had Obi-Wan, who has a decade to think about the way that he left Anakin, thinking he killed him before realizing that he didn't. And there's this moment at the end of the lightsaber fight where Obi-Wan is apologizing to him for what happened. And in just the slightest moment, and I think it's visually beautifully represented with this blue light on Anakin's face, where I want to say Vader, but I think it really is Anakin in that moment, kind of absolving Obi-Wan of responsibility for the creation of Vader.
Yeah. It's a good like juxtaposition between the first time that they meet as Vader, you know, in the suit versus Obi-Wan. Where,
exactly.
You know, I am what you made me, and then that's pretty much the opposite of what he says.
Yeah, you didn't kill Anakin Skywalker. I did. That's what Anakin says here.
Yeah.
And then the red, like when he brings his own saber up, the red light envelops him again, and he says, "And that's why I will destroy you." And at that moment, that's when Obi-Wan, retroactively echoing what Luke would say later in that very conversation I was talking about before.
Mm-hmm.
So then my friend is truly dead.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like in that moment, he's listening to what Padme had said in her final words, like there is good in him. And it's in that moment where Vader convinces him that there's nothing of his friend left. Like we know better, and it takes the love of his son to bring it back out of him years later. But that's the moment where there's additional context that's given to not only what Vader says about Obi-Wan in Return of the Jedi, but also too what Obi-Wan says about Vader
in
on
A New Hope. Well, and A New Hope, where he says like Vader was a pupil of mine, he killed your father. You know, like
sure, yeah. I mean, he's taking that and he's interpreting it literally for Luke. So it's totally that makes that even more fair game than it was before.
And for me that surface level part is that connection is what I like too. But like, you know, that's not Obi-Wan just being a clever workaround. It's like, no, he kind of got that from
Vader directly. You got it straight from the horse's mouth.
Yeah.
But also too, in the moment in Return of the Jedi where Obi-Wan is so convinced, and he tells Luke he's more machine now than man, twisted and evil. The good man who was your father was destroyed. Like he talks in very final terms about the fact that he believes Anakin Skywalker is fully and truly dead. And honestly, too, because at that moment where they meet at the end of this part of the show, that is true. It is Luke that brings Anakin back.
Yeah,
and that can't happen unless you have the titular New Hope. So. In addition to just the fact that this fight was expertly photographed, choreographed, and executed, there's just a lot of additional meat that is added here to those future interactions that we see between Obi-Wan and Vader, Obi-Wan and Luke, Vader and Luke, and Vader and Obi-Wan in Episode 4. You know, it all just
Darth
comes
calls
together.
him Darth at the end.
Yeah.
Like,
which
what?
Is perfect.
You like made that bridge even better too? Come on. Like, that's crazy.
Which totally ties into his acceptance of Anakin's death in that moment.
Yeah.
You're not Anakin. I have stopped calling you Anakin. I'll see you later, Darth. And what do we see? Like the very first thing out of his mouth when they meet again in Episode 4.
Yep.
Darth. Perfect.
Exactly. It's almost like they made it to be like that. It's a
so I just don't get it. I don't get why. Well, okay, that's not true. I get it. Like like I'm a Star Trek fan. I understand the importance of canon and of continuity. I'm a friggin' comic book fan. You know,
right?
But really, the good faith that these writers have approached to the material is what really just wins me over at the end of the day, because they clearly have demonstrated not only a care for the material that came before them, but an understanding of how thematically this stuff ties together. And it's giving credence to things that we've talked about since Revenge of the Sith came out, but that had never actually been confirmed in an official production before. And now we have that. And I think that's great.
Yeah. 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 And you can feel that on screen. It's the fact that they brought back Hayden and he's in the suit, and then they have the flashback. But man, that final scene where they were able to come up with the plausible idea of we can have Obi-Wan. I mean, and that's shocking too. It's not a surprising thing to think that oh yeah, Obi-Wan is going to defeat Darth Vader here, or at least a draw, because that's going to tie into, again, when they beat each other in A New Hope, and the last time we met, I was but the learner and now I'm the master. Like that.
Yeah.
That the end of this fight, adds to that whole thing, but Obi-Wan kicks crap out of him at the end. He's like Batman.
And Vader tells him as much. You have your strength back.
Yeah.
Before they start
Exactly.
going at it.
Yeah.
It was just so cool and gratifying.
Yeah, and again, they don't betray. Vader's not leaping around like, attack the clones Yoda or whatever. Right. And there's a moment early on where Vader starts to grasp the lightsaber with both hands, and you can see his fingers kind of like wrapping around it, almost like unrobotic like almost like he's got to be like, oh crap, I'm scared. You can see some of the fear coming back through it in his movements.
He can't power his way out of this anymore because he's actually facing a foe that can go toe to toe with him. So where the first time they fought in this show, Vader clearly had an advantage because Obi-Wan had disconnected himself from the Force for so long. In this moment, it's just like Vader all of a sudden realizes what it's like to actually face off against someone who can threaten him. And that realization is disorienting for him. So I thought it was great. And honestly, it just it gives additional context too to kind of the fun that it looks like Obi-Wan is having with him on the Death Star. Because he's not breaking a sweat, and he's like smiling through the whole thing. Right?
He already knows what's going to happen. Yeah, exactly.
He's got his number now. Like, he knows how to handle him, so he's not nearly as threatened or fearful as he was the first time they faced off here. So, honestly, that's another thing that I just take away from this is that, where we saw them at the end of Revenge of the Sith, Obi-Wan is distraught. He's really, down about what he had to do to his former friend. And that doesn't totally mesh really well with what we see in episode 4. Mm-hmm. But him having gone through this experience makes that make more sense, at least to me now. Mm-hmm. That, he's gone through this already with Vader, so he knows how to manage him. And he knows what he needs to do, but also, you have Luke added to the equation by that point as well, which changes things a bit more. But he knows what to do. He knows how to handle him, and he knows that it's not going to be a threat unless Obi-Wan lets it, and that's what he does.
Yeah. And the brilliance of whoever's idea it was that, when Obi-Wan beats him, we can have him cut the helmet in half.
Yeah.
And, that was done so well. And it doesn't... what you see in Return of the Jedi, it's still its own thing. It doesn't negate that or make that not as cool or whatever. You know what I mean? The fact that it is this crazy bridge between the prequel trilogy and the original, and of course you can see Hayden Christensen looking like the scarred underneath, under helmet Darth Vader, and have Anakin's voice and, the James Earl Jones robotic voice kind of meshed together. The whole sound design behind that was amazing, and the dialogue that they chose for that scene was amazing. That was just the way that played out. It was, again, one of those very surprising things where this is the kind of thing where the show justified itself. You could imagine, they'll have a lightsaber fight, Obi-Wan will kind of win or whatever, but having this scene and having that play out the way it did is it was just excellent.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly too, we had seen a similar moment play out in Rebels at the end of the second season.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think anybody could have anticipated that seeing a similar moment like that realized fully in live action with the original performers on the table.
Yeah.
And I mean, it just takes a whole other level of significance when it's translated into live action. And it was great. It was really cool to be able to see not only Christensen get another shot, but also just the narrative value that came from seeing the visible dichotomy of Darth Vader and Anakin Skywalker represented that way.
Yeah.
Wonderfully photographed. And yeah, the switches between the voice modulation, also something that we kind of saw in Rebels, but far more significant here, just by nature of who is bringing those performances to life. So, total treat.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to hear him like scream Obi-Wan as Obi-Wan leaves. And okay, so here's the big thing. Why didn't Obi-Wan kill Vader when he totally had him dead to rights? Like, why didn't he do it? Chris, tell me why. I know you talked a little bit earlier about like, well, Obi-Wan, his thing is, mercy. And of course he can't kill him because that's not what happens. But, before this fight started on that transport, he said, whatever happens, this ends today. Well, so he had it in his mind, like, this is I'll do what I must. I said it in Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, and here I am saying it again in Episode 6 of my limited Disney Plus series. Like, this ends. And then I think with me, like, the difference happens when the helmet gets cut and he sees what's going on, and they have that conversation.
Not only is Obi-Wan able to briefly reconnect with his friend for a fleeting moment, which I think humanizes Vader a little bit more in his own eyes, but I think he's also seeing that every day Anakin is living a hell. And not killing him accomplishes something that killing him would never accomplish, and that's just like an utter humiliation. That Vader has lived with this rage against Kenobi for so long that having it compounded by realizing he still can't match up to him is such a debilitating defeat. And Vader is determined to continue trying to find him.
Yeah.
Until he realizes that if he does, he might have the chance to lose the confidence of Darth Sidious. And then all of a sudden he drops. I don't know. I'm not bothered by his... I know some people are... a friend of mine texted me right after he watched it and said, why didn't Obi-Wan kill him? And it just doesn't bug me because it's not his mode of operation. Like, it's not in his reaction to conflicts like that. I mean, we saw it throughout the Clone Wars, and we certainly saw it in several of the movies. It's not like he sees Vader as a battle droid, It's he sees a friend who has fallen and who can't threaten him anymore. And I didn't think it just seemed to me like he didn't think he needed to take that additional step because Anakin's dead. Right.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of the point that I got out of the dialogue, the person that I thought was still there isn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe he thought going into it too, and this is admittedly projection on my part. He could have conceived of the idea of killing Vader as a mercy killing of Anakin.
Right.
But the circumstances changed after the fight. And it just, again, it's not something that bothers me all that much because Obi-Wan is a Jedi Master. And it is very much in the mind of a Jedi Master not to inflict unnecessary harm. And in that moment, maybe he just didn't think it was necessary.
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't bother me either. It just... I feel like the way it played out, like, it did enough. It explained itself well. I think. But yeah, and especially when you have the next scene with getting to see Palpatine, and I wasn't convinced. I was surprised. I was surprised that we saw Palpatine. Having him on a as a hologram, I guess was a good. I was like, man, it'd be really crazy if we saw him like for real, because we talked a little bit about like, well, how does Palpatine even operate in this time period and all that, and I think that is interesting that it even shows like even with Vader, it's like it must be huge, if it's even Vader's seeing him, not really seeing him in person too much, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah. I mean, I thought it made sense. It's always good to see Ian McDermott in that part again. Although, I mean, he did admittedly look a little different than I would have thought. I think maybe they applied CG to him instead of makeup. I don't know if that's.
I felt to me they were trying to make. It felt like they were trying to make him look like a hybridized Palpatine that's almost closer to the one that you see in the original trilogy, but not yet. But also not Revenge of the Sith. It felt like they were trying to a concentrated effort in trying to get some sort of middle ground.
Sure, yeah, but either way, I mean, it was a pivotal moment because every other time that we've seen the Emperor talk about Kenobi after the end of the Clone Wars, it's always been extremely dismissive. Sidious just doesn't care about Obi-Wan. He thinks that Obi-Wan is really inconsequential, and every time Vader brings him up, that's usually how he's introduced into the conversation. Just like at the first episode of Rebels, when Vader says, like, maybe we can find Kenobi, and the Emperor basically says, perhaps, if he's still there. He just doesn't care.
Yeah.
So when he sees that Kenobi and Vader's rage toward Kenobi is deviating Vader from accomplishing his goal, Palpatine uses that moment to chastise Vader. And it's only then that Vader breaks off and drops it until conceivably we see them face off on the Death Star. So I thought it was an important moment to... There's a lot of plot armor there, but I thought it gave it some additional credence and made it make more sense about like why Vader didn't continue the relentless onslaught for Obi-Wan. I know for sure it's because Sidious doesn't see Obi-Wan as a priority. They've got bigger fish to fry and a giant space station to finish.
Yeah, and I guess and that also kind of importantly, it kind of answers, or it gives an answer to the question of like, well, why doesn't Vader go to Tatooine? Why doesn't he go back to Tatooine?
Well, that we know. That we already know. There's nothing there for him but pain.
Yeah.
Granted, I find it a fascinating commentary that the recent material has added to Vader, that he makes his home on the planet that scarred him so heavily.
Yeah.
It says what kind of a miserable son of a bitch he really is.
Yeah.
At heart.
Yeah.
But, we've seen that explored a bit in the comics, that Vader has absolutely no interest in revisiting any semblance of his early life unless he absolutely has to.
Right.
And it's only when he realizes that Luke lived there that he goes back, which you see in I think it's the first arc of the 2015 Darth Vader series that was written by Kieran Gillen. Beautiful, beautiful artwork by Salvador Larroca. There's no desire for him to return.
Yeah. Because I feel like he's not just saying it. He does consider Anakin Skywalker as somebody that doesn't exist anymore. Like,
yeah, he visibly and audibly took pride in killing his previous identity in the show. So the idea of nurturing that consciousness again is not something he wants to do. Like, there's pain there. Like, he lost his mother there. But there's potentially also a positive link there because it's where he spent his childhood. Even if it was a childhood in slavery, it's still the place that he spent time with his mother. And we know he loved his mother dearly. So, it's... If people are bringing up, why did you... Well, there's also no reason for him to go to Tatooine. It's not like Obi-Wan ever mentioned Tatooine to him.
Right. And that's kind of what I was saying. Like, oh, if he dropped the drones or whatever from searching for him, there could have been one on its way to Tatooine, but not anymore. You know?
Not anymore.
Yeah.
I think it adds up.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, like we get good Obi-Wan resolution with a lot of people. We get to see him interact with Leia one last time, and that whole exchange is just it's just fantastic. It's like a fantastic, like it's the biggest unexpected thing in the series, other than some of these Vader moments for me. It has just been Leia, just how great she is in this whole series, how much it added to her character and her character's interaction in history with Obi-Wan is just fantastic.
And how she's a product of her parents. You know, we started talking about that a little bit before, but Obi-Wan outright and explicitly verbalizing what she takes from both Padme and Anakin.
Mm-hmm.
That's really cool. And it does jive completely with the person that she becomes. So, you know, honestly, like, she might take more after her father than Luke does, considering the things that we see her get up to as a primary leader in the Rebel Alliance, because she is led by her passion. She has the acumen of her mother in the political sphere and in the diplomatic sphere, and in her ability to rally people, but she takes a lot from her father, who also had a great ability to rally people and to empathize with the soldiers that he served with. But that passion clearly drives Leia in everything that she does. And Obi-Wan saying, yeah, you get that from your father. That was really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of, you know, it makes me look back on the characterizations, you know, from it just... the characterizations of Padme and Anakin from the original trilogy, from the sequel, the prequel trilogy. Goodness, gosh, they're all
a lot of trilogies.
A lot of trilogies. Yeah, it just makes those characters that much richer, you know, because it does make them feel like they are a distant memory, like they are legends at this point. And it shows like, yeah, everything he is saying is true, and that she does have those qualities. Wow, it all does connect. It is all very cyclical in that way. And Star Wars is very, you know, much interested in that kind of thing. Yeah, so getting that, and again the tag that like maybe they could interact in the future, but yeah, we'll have to be careful. I don't know.
Well, and I've seen some people complain about like how formal she sounds to Obi-Wan and her request for help in A New Hope with the context of these interactions, but I don't think that holds water either, because not only is she not a child anymore by that time, but she has a much higher level of responsibility and station in her own life that speaking formally is just a natural way of life for her by then.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I can chalk it up to. I mean, she clearly has a great affinity for Ben Kenobi by the time we get to episode 4.
Mm-hmm.
Now we know why. It's not just stories that her father told her. It's this interaction. I think that's a worthy wrinkle to add to the canon, personally.
Yeah. And it's very Star Wars, really. It's less political thing and this more like this personal, deep personal kind of connection amongst everything else that's going on. Yeah.
And it amplifies Leia's performance, or her importance to the overall mythos, I think.
Yeah.
You know?
No, absolutely.
It can be easy for original trilogy fans to overlook Leia's importance, even though she's like one of the 3 primary characters. But understandably, people get more focused on Luke. But this additional material is just helping to further solidify that, like she's a part of that family too. And she's an extraordinarily important one. And you shouldn't lose sight of that. But that moment was great. The fact that Obi-Wan and Owen had a little bit of a clearing of the air was nice.
That was amazing.
It doesn't seem like they're super clear by the time we get to episode 4, but it was a good moment. And then having that hello there.
Oh my
that
gosh.
first interaction between Obi-Wan and Luke.
That got me. That got me so good because I'm like, well, they can't really say, what is this going to be? Is this going to be a whole conversation? This is going to be awkward. What's he going to say? And then he just said hello there. I'm like, oh my gosh, that was amazing. And it's one of those.
And they left it there, which I think is good. There.
It's great. It's great. I mean, it gives you that. You can kind of build the story in your head of what that conversation is. It didn't need to be anything more or less than that, because the story wasn't really about Luke. But you got Luke to be included there, and it gives Luke some history there because he does know of Ben Kenobi in episode 4. You kind of don't know to what extent, but not much. Yeah. So this could be it. And that's totally fine. And they got their little ship in there, and the little ship's in episode 4. Like, go back and look, so
he's playing with it. He's playing with it while C-3PO's taking his oil bath. Yeah,
exactly. And it keeps Luke off the table too until A New Hope, as it kind of should be. He just needs to be a boy. It's all there, and it was done so. And it's able to take something that, well, why do you need? Nothing happens between those two. Why do you need to make something to show that? And then they do this, and it's excellent.
Absolutely.
And it's not like in that whole hello there moment. It's a little fan servicey, but it's done so well, and it's not like Star Wars doesn't love repeat phrases from Obi-Wan specifically. He's the originator of them. So
and we know he says that.
Yeah, that's the thing he said.
It's part of his. It's part of his lexicon.
I just want to know how many takes they did of that. Was he able to get through it knowing that's what he was going to say?
If this show ever gets released on physical media, they need to do a supercut of all of the takes that he did.
Oh my gosh. I can't wait for the behind the scenes feature. It's going to be so good.
Yeah. But then, the show ends with something that for me was legitimately surprising. But
it was.
I have to tell a brief story just because it's still a point of pride for me. So I went to the I went to the Star Wars celebration that took place in Chicago in 2019, which of course was the 20th anniversary year of The Phantom Menace.
Mm-hmm.
And on a Monday morning, which I think was the last day of the convention, in the big celebration hall, which was just an arena that was across the street from McCormick Place, where I think college basketball games were played, and I think the mayor was inaugurated there, and the pro wrestling events have taken place there and all that stuff. But it was the hall for event programming at Star Wars Celebration. It was a huge audience, of course. Probably 5,000 or 6,000 people. And on a Monday morning was the 20th anniversary panel of The Phantom Menace. And Ahmed Best was there. People went nuts for him. For a guy who has... Talk about someone who has garnered unfair criticism from people for no other reason than just he performed a part. It was really cool to be in the crowd and experience how much love everybody had. I mean, this is a group of people that got together on a Monday morning to celebrate what a lot of people think is the worst Star Wars movie.
Yeah.
I was in 6th grade when The Phantom Menace came out. That movie was made for me. So I do not have any of the baggage that a lot of other people do for any of the prequels, but particularly that one.
Yeah.
And my love for it has only grown with time. But George Lucas himself recorded a message for that panel, called The Phantom Menace his favorite Star Wars movie, and told us all that he loved us for being there and celebrating it. Personal point of pride that I was one of those people. Just saying. But suffice it to say that, I like The Phantom Menace a lot. I'm unapologetic of the fact that I like it a lot. So seeing Qui-Gon Jinn again was a really powerful moment for me. is a character that I don't think we've seen quite enough from, frankly, in the years since he's been introduced. But it was just a perfect way to wrap a bow on this show. And having Neeson there again to play him, I can't overstate how nice I thought that moment was. So,
yeah.
Just throwing it out.
Yeah, they teased it in the show, a couple of times, like, Master, he's coming for me, you still haven't seen you yet, we tease it, and then at the end of Revenge of the Sith, and what's happening? And
is he even there? And we find out, yeah, he was.
Yeah, exactly. It was awesome to see him, and the way it ends was great. I want to know what the hell happens, he's the one that teaches them how to turn into a Force ghost too. Like, okay,
I'm glad you asked, because I'm sure we haven't seen the last of the show. Mark my words. I know
sure?
It's kind of in the ether.
Yeah.
But they certainly left the door open. And
yeah,
I hope they go somewhere totally different if they do a second season. But
I feel like they would have to.
Yeah, they ran up really close against all of the walls that exist around the original trilogy.
Yeah.
And parts of the prequels. So I think it would benefit them to go somewhere totally different. But there's a lot of mythology for them that they could explore.
Yeah, because Obi-Wan is clearly, particularly when?
Yeah, from the shows.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because that is the question. It's like, where does this go? And it's clearly going somewhere, whether it does continue as in another season or not. Obi-Wan is a renewed person. He is changed. He's a different person at the end of the show versus the beginning. He has a little bit more hope, because he sees both, Luke and Leia now, and he knows what Vader is and what's on the line, and he's got different clothes. He's got his lightsaber, strapped on again, and
he's open and out about who he is. He's not hiding anymore.
He's not hiding, yeah.
And he's gonna build his damn house.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, and then he finally sees Qui-Gon. So he's going somewhere. Something, there is more story to be told, whether we see it or not. I kind of hope we do.
Totally.
So before this show started, the whole question was, I hope it justifies itself. I hope it's good, and hope it all makes sense. And I feel like they've earned doing more if that is what happens.
Oh yeah, man, I agree completely.
So yeah, so at the end of the day, I think for me, I'm not really disappointed in any major way. I felt like there's so many standout moments from this thing that I just already put up into like my brain info dump of like Star Wars canon, great Star Wars moments, that just jump up there. And even the things that maybe aren't as strong, I feel is just not. I feel like some of those things will come to the forefront more on repeat viewings. But the strength of the Obi-Wan and Vader stuff is just so potent. Yeah. That it carries the show as it rightfully should, but man, a lot of the other stuff, Leia, it just works so well, and it makes me glad that this thing ended up being a 6-episode series instead of a movie, because they really were able to dig into a lot of the characters, and it really didn't overstay its welcome, in my opinion. They were able to use the format and make it cool.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I don't really have anything else to add. I really do think that we went around the world about why this show was a worthy endeavor, and why this character continues to be worthy of exploration, but also just why people love him so much. They treated him well. They gave him some additional cool friends along the way. and the other familiar faces they gave us, they were true to form on. So there are some nits to pick, sure, with the way that the plot progressed and maybe even some of the visual choices that they made, but in general, overall, this is great, and I'd certainly be up for seeing more.
Yeah, I would too. And I trust them if they do more.
Yeah.
Hopefully they don't wait another 10 years to figure out whether they should do more. And I'm sure they wouldn't.
No, I think they're motivated now.
Yeah, I think so too.
Generally speaking, people are pretty happy with it.
Yeah.
It's just, sometimes it's hard to tell if you spend too much time on Twitter.
Yeah. Well, I did see that. I did post a picture. I got a penny. I was in a coffee shop and they had a penny poll going, between Stranger Things and Obi-Wan, and it was like, put a penny on this side of the box if you're more into Stranger Things, and put a penny on this side of the box if you think Obi-Wan's better, and Obi-Wan's stack of pennies was notably higher. And so I put that on Twitter. I'm like, what do you guys think? And everybody's like, Stranger Things. And I was like, well, the pennies don't lie. That's real. Twitter's not real. So
True enough.
So I guess this is where we'll wrap it up. If there's more Star Wars that either we or the people that listen to the show want to hear people talk about, I'm sure we'll talk about it more. Otherwise, we will find other satellite things to talk about. Chris, you got anything to plug?
Sure. So, we're still full steam ahead on my Star Trek show Discovery Debrief, where we're breaking down all the new episodes of Star Trek Strange New Worlds currently, which is awesome, by the way, if you haven't seen it. I think I said that last time, but I'll just repeat it because it's true. So check out Discovery Debrief if you're inclined to hear our perspectives on that show. Also, too, I was recently on an episode of the Batman Book Club, had a lot of fun with our friend Ryan Lauer talking Batman Face the Face, which is the 1 year later Batman story that was written by James Robinson and alternated between Batman and Detective for 4 months in 2006.
Mm-hmm.
That was a lot of fun.
Very good story.
And, yeah, it was really cool to revisit that story. I actually have quite a fondness for it, which we talked about in that show. So if you haven't checked that out, please do. Otherwise, if you want to check in with me, follow me on Twitter at Chris Clow, ChrisClow.
Awesome. Yeah, and of course you can follow me on Twitter at SMB_Ryan and the Batman Podcast Network at Batpod Network. And this show, yes, I remembered it, the BOF Satellite Show, you can follow at BOF Show. Bill said, at one point, Bill, I think, Bill's been really into this, the Elvis movie. So he did like a reaction, that's his satellite, thing at the moment. He did a satellite show talking Elvis, I guess. So I don't know. This might be episode 15, but I don't know if episode 14 got posted as a podcast, because episode 14 is on the YouTube channel. So things are getting confusing, because then there's like a social hour, episode 15 of the... Oh gosh, it says it's episode 15 of the social hour, but really it's like Satellite Show episode 15. The labeling's all crazy. So this actually might get posted as the Satellite Show episode 16. God, I'm going to leave it to Bill. So whatever you see this listed as on the podcast feed will be the actual episode number of the Satellite Show. In my opinion, it's probably 16, but who's counting? Certainly not me. So yeah, enjoy Obi-Wan. Go see Elvis. Bill's convinced me. I'm gonna go see it. I might go see it tomorrow. Seems like it's good. It seems like even if you're not a Elvis fan, it seems like people are enjoying it. I'm getting something out of it, which any biopic, any really good biopic kind of does that. So yeah. So that's all I have for this episode. For Chris, I'm Ryan. May the Force be with you.
You've been listening to the Batman on Film Satellite Show, BOF's non-Batman pop culture podcast. Follow the show on Twitter at BOF Show. Follow BOF on Twitter at The Batman on Film. For all of Team BOF, I'm Announcer Rachel. Authoritative, definitive, the original Batman on film, established in 1998.